I've been doing a series of videos lately online about Herman Melville and about his works and how his works are provocative on issues of importance to the American Revolution, the Constitution of American society, its Constitution, and what we might likely expect of America in the future in relation to the founding and the founders' conception of the American country, or the founders' religious beliefs themselves, which were principally deistic. And deism is a doctrine that means that the deity or the God of the universe is a kind of mechanical or mathematical or a very high-thinking mathematical mind that winds up the very clockwork of the universe and then sets that in motion, but never after that intervenes in any way in anything that happens in nature. It's all up to man after God does the initial conjuring of the elements of the universe and then throwing them into the shape and form that they're in today. So this is an important issue to Melville, because when he boards the Pequod ship, or Melville qua Ishmael, polymath, someone who is a student of every subject of knowledge. So if you intend, as I say, you are plunged into the waters of Genesis at the outset of Melville's Moby Dick, because you are literally plunged into the waters of Genesis constitute everything that is. So when you're sailing on the Pequod, you are able to think about everything that is, because you are on a ship called life. Melville said, "This is my Harvard, this is my Yale. This is where I learned about the world, about reality, about God, about man, about angels, about devils, about human nature, about war," and so on. He only needed one ship, he said, to learn about those things, and that was the Pequod. And that's why Moby Dick is worth reading, because it's a novel that seeks to teach about everything, not about some things. So he has a lot to say in that novel, like Malcolm X in the 1960s, about how we became a racist nation, and what is the convincing evidence that we are a racist nation. What has made our racism, what has constituted our racism. So there was an extreme attempt on Melville's part some 12 years before the Civil War to explain the elements that went into racism and how they traced back to the power of the British Empire and the very language that was made by the English peoples about black, darkness, and white, and how those colors associate with various things. Dr. King in the 60s would have said, the future will not be, he said, the day of the black man. It will not be the day of the white man. It will be the day of man as man. Now what he meant by that is that the future will be the day of black and white, which constitute every color of the color spectrum. The color spectrum is an aspect of physics. See, when light impinges upon me from the lamp I have up there, when it impinges upon my eyes, it has to actually note what color my eyes are, because my color, if the color of my eyes is brown, different light is going to impinge upon my eye than if my color of my eye is red, or the color of my eye is blue. If I'm wearing a black shirt in the summertime and it's a hot summer day and the sun is beating down upon my shirt, that shirt is accepting light quanta, or particles of light, of every color in the spectrum. And I therefore am warmer when I wear that shirt than I would be if I wore a white shirt, because a white shirt doesn't absorb any color because it has all the colors in it already. So it has every color. Whereas if it is black, it doesn't have every color. It absorbs the light, hence energy, and keeps your body warmer. So if you're going out on a winter evening and you're going to a haunted house around Halloween time, you might want to pick a black shirt. If you're like a young lady and you're thin and you get cold in the winter time, you want to pick a black shirt that night, not a white shirt, because you want moonlight. You want your shirt to catch moonlight. You want it to catch light. You want it to catch the neon light inside the haunted house to keep your body warm. But if you were actually outside on a summer day, they tell you to wear a white shirt, because a white shirt is going to actually reject any of the sun's light or any other light around it. If you're in a store that has very bright lights, it won't absorb any of that light, and you won't feel any hotter or any warmer. So it depends on what you need. If you're on a street corner one day and a 75-year-old man is having a heat stroke, you're probably going to want him to remove his shirt. And if you put another shirt on him, you probably want to put a white shirt on him so it rejects light so he doesn't get any hotter. But if you cover him up with a black blanket, then that black blanket's already going to be too warm, and it's going to make a guy who's suffering from his body, has too much heat, it's going to make him too hot. So that's just knowledge. We're seeking knowledge. If we're going to involve ourselves in questions of racial relations, which were a very important topic to Melville in his age, 12 years before the Civil War. The country was constituted in such a way that black and white had reached such a tension at that time, which Thomas Jefferson had predicted about 38 to 42 years before. He said this country is going to have a horrible race war, and there's going to be a conflict between the races that's going to end up in bathing the entire country in blood. Now, he predicted that. Thomas Jefferson, he made the prediction, and he could see. He looked with his eyes and used his mind, which he had read an enormous amount of literature about science and society and history. All the founders were extremely well versed in history and science and everything about government for the whole history of the world back to the beginnings of humanity. So they could make predictions about what might happen in the country because they had spent that time and care writing and thinking about the things that have happened. We should ask ourselves today, do our leaders strike us as these kinds of people who have learned from the founders what they need to learn? Are they giving us messages today? Are they projecting messages to the people of learned men and women who are seeking to alleviate the country's problems? Or are they really just merely talking about jobs? We need to have more jobs. We've heard that from leaders for roughly since 1970. They keep talking about jobs and economy, but they never talk about anything else. We never hear a campaign that's based on, I want to end racism in the United States. Dr. King almost constituted such a campaign in 1968 when he decided to run for the presidency of the United States. And he decided one of the principles of his campaign was going to be, I'm going to make this not a racist nation. Now, how could he do that? How could he accomplish creating a less racist country? Well, his whole life was dedicated to that. From 1955 to 1968, the day he died, he worked 20-hour days. When he went out and did a sit-in, a demonstration, and he demonstrated, he was bringing to it principles that he had learned from Gandhi, that he had learned from all the sociology that he had studied in college, which was how society's institutions work together to either produce a cooperative relationship among people or a dissentious one, or a dissenting one, if you will, a dissenting and a descending one. My friend said when Nazi Germany in 1933 brought Hitler to power, it descended into hell. When this country had a civil war in 1860 to 1865, it descended into hell. It should be our leaders' job to actually make sure the country doesn't descend into hell. And Melville thought he would write about it, and he'd point to the people who made the language, because it was the language that was the problem. The very language. So Melville's work is about language, and he was one of the greatest scholars of language that ever wrote. We can look at the structure of Moby Dick and see that he ends with the French finis, end. Just as Thomas Hobbes, who also had an enormous knowledge of language, of the English language, and might have even created much of it in Great Britain, how he ends his Leviathan, finis, with the same word. So the two works are related to each other in some sense. What's the relation? Why is it that in poetry, and this is an issue Melville brings up in a chapter on the color white in Moby Dick. Why, when we use white, do we associate it with God? Why do we associate it with goodness? Why do we associate it with sperm and with the feeling of pleasure? But why do we associate dark with crime, criminality, the words of crime? You know, Sylvia Plath has a poem that I love very much. It says, "The moon hung in the sky like a dark crime." See? Why Malcolm X asked in the 60s, why is crime being put into the minds of people in relation to black? That's what he wanted to know. Why is that happening? Melville said it's because Great Britain, that empire that actually bestrode the entire earth in violation of the teachings of kings of the Bible, that you can't have a government of the whole earth because that government will be ungodly. See? This is not a fanatical statement by a believer, by the way. I'm a philosopher, and I'm someone who questions, what is God? Well, when somebody makes an assertion about God, what do you mean by that? What do you personally mean by that? What does someone else mean by that? What do people mean in constituting a language in a way? Stars, put out your fires. Let not night see my deep and black desires. That's a Shakespearean quote. Now what does that make people? Does that make people associate black people with crime? Does that make does the association of white with God? Does that make people associate white with goodness? Melville seemed to think so, and he seemed to think that the English had made it that way because they wanted people to think in racially divisive terms, in terms that invited division among people, you know, so that they could have people multiply to infinity and they could divide and conquer. See, that's what the Romans used, a strategy the Romans used. Divide et imperia. Divide and conquer. And so Melville pointed to the language and the reasons. And Malcolm X was back in the 60s and he said, yep, that's what they done to us. And that was his statement about that. What do you think about that? Read Melville's chapter of White in Moby Dick and see his comments about how the very colors cause us to have a language that encourages sometimes racism, or that at least question whether or not Malcolm was right. Was he right about that or not? He brought the issue up in the 60s. After he was assassinated, people were too afraid to bring the issue up anymore, I think. But it needs to be discussed because there are hate crimes in the country, there's division, there's all kinds of problems, and it doesn't seem like our leaders have done very much about it, and that they're doing as much as they can about it. Melville did something about it. He wrote about it so we can have the knowledge and the power through knowledge to actually take command over ourselves, over our country, over the world, or we can at least know how it was constituted so we can know whether to oppose or to accept, so we can responsibly achieve a better country.